Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about the three-part story, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, Peacemakers. Now, this story was originally published as 3 issues of the anthology series Legends of the DC Universe. And Legends of the DC Universe was kind of a weird comic from the 90s. Specifically, these issues specifically came out in the summer of 1998. And I say it was a weird series mostly because it was an anthology, and beyond just being a normal anthology series like a Tales of Suspense or Brave and the Bold, where you had a same creative team every time. With this series, you had different creative teams for every story, and the stories covered different characters and different times in those characters' lives. So this story, for example, takes place, but it chronicles the first time Green Lantern and Green Arrow meet, meaning that it has to take place somewhere between Emerald Dawn 2 and JLA Year 1. So there's not very much time where this story could take place, and it is a good story. It's very interesting. Written by Denny O'Neil and penciled by Greg Land and drawn by and inked by Dick Guardano. It does have a good creative team. Guardano's inks are standout in this story, and they really help Land's pencils come to life. And Land's pencils are not bad in this story. I know that Land is an artist mired in controversy, but his art was published in these comics. It is what it is. Nothing doing about it. But that's just a thing. That's just the thing about Greg Land, and then Denny O'Neil. This is one of my favorite Denny O'Neil Green Lantern stories, just because I honestly generally don't especially like the way Denny O'Neil writes Green Lantern. He writes Green Arrow pretty well, but his Green Lantern's a little funky. He's a little too his Green Lantern's a little too naive. But yeah, honestly, that's kind of all I've got for this sort of preamble. So I think we should just hop into our story today, which begins with Hal Jordan being chased down by a missile in a jet. Hal is able to avoid the rocket, but in the process he crashes his plane. But he is able to fly to safety as Green Lantern, and then capture the rebels who attacked his plane, and bring them to the government headquarters of Minglia. We then briefly cut to the U.S., where we see Green Arrow stop some bad guys who had broken into his penthouse, and later, in that same day, we also see that Oliver Queen has decided to go to Minglia to protect some of his company's assets that keep getting stolen by the rebels. We then cut back to Minglia, where we see Hal talking to the military leader of the country, General Zoe. Hal asks what will happen to the rebels, and the general assures Hal that the prisoners will be taken back to their village. But we see that General Zoe has given the order to kill the prisoners and drop their bodies in pieces throughout the jungle, and lace the jungle between the government base and the rebel base with landmines. We then see Hal and Oliver run into each other at the camp, and Oliver basically just thinks that Hal is a square. But once the pair separates, we see that Oliver has come to play hero. Later, and after midnight, we see a group of rebels fire some rockets into the weapons depot, and a massive fire starts, waking up Hal and Oliver, and sending Green Lantern and Green Arrow into action. Green Lantern flies in and handles the fire. Meanwhile, Green Arrow takes down a handful of the rebels, but a couple of them run away and get in a jeep and drive off, so Green Arrow decides to chase them. We then see that Green Lantern takes a handful of the wounded soldiers to a hospital before we cut back to Green Arrow, who's chasing the rebels through the jungle and runs over a landmine. So his jeep explodes and he's able to crawl away just before he's basically going to die in the explosion. But as he's crawling away, the rebels find him. And once the rebels find him, he passes out due to his injuries and is carried off by the rebels. Back at the military HQ, we see Hal let General Zoe know that he will be returning to the States the next morning, And we also see that General Zoe is living the good life, smoking Cuban cigars, drinking fine wine, and we kind of get the impression that all of this is only possible because of the war. We then see Hal suit up and fly away, and we cut to Green Arrow, who wakes up in the rebel village, and we see that a nun is attending to Oliver's wounds, but Oliver passes out again. We then cut back to the military base and 3 months into the future. And at the base, we hear that the monk Thon is to arrange a meeting with our Prime Minister and the United Nations representative to begin peace talks. Bad. Very bad. If there is no war, there is no influx of money from our foreign friends. No fine cigars, no vintage wines, no Paris vacations. We return to the filth and disease and poverty of our fathers. I do not wish to go back there, and I will not go back there. Learn where and when this Thon will arrive. We eliminate him, and there will be no talks. You speak of murder. I speak of war. We then cut back to Green Arrow, where we see that he has recovered from his wounds, and he's talking to the nun, who is explaining why she is there in the jungle. And basically it's because she believes that the villagers need help, and that they have no real interest in rebellion, they only want to be left alone by the government. Then they run into a kid who has taken Green Arrow's bow and is trying to practice. So Ollie takes the opportunity to show off, and he then begins to teach the kid how to shoot. And he's doing this as a way to help the kid deal with the trauma of seeing his family murdered right in front of him. We then jump back to the Army HQ, where we see that Hal Jordan has returned with another attack plane. And while Hal is walking to a tent to get some food, we hear that Thon is about to arrive at the village and that the army is sending for a bombing run and some ground troops to kill Thon. And they're trying to kill him to keep the war going. Back at the village, we see that Green Arrow and the nun meet Thon, and then we cut again back to the base, where we see that Hal is suited up as your Green Lantern to help the army by defending their fighter jet as it makes its way to the village for their attack. And as the attack begins, we see that the nun tries to run off to help the wounded, but immediately she steps on a landmine and blows up right in front of Ollie, who looks at some of the shrapnel of the mine, and he sees his company's logos all over it, causing him to pick up his bow and arrow and pick a side, and being on the side of the village. Then he goes through the village, taking down soldiers as the village burns down, until he finds a group of them trying to kill Thon. So he takes them down, and him and Thon start to run out, only to be stopped by Green Lantern, who begins questioning Oliver because he doesn't recognize him with his shiny new beard. But before he can get any answers, he has to play some defense, blocking some rockets, which warms Oliver up to the idea of him being a good guy. So Ollie explains, once Green Lantern gets him and Thon airborne, what's going on. But Green Lantern has some major doubts, so he wants to get everyone back to the city, starting with the monk. And Oliver asks to stay and search for survivors and to bury the dead. And eventually he finds the only survivor, the kid who he was teaching archery to, Lim. We then cut to the military base, where we see that Zoe has learned that Thon has reached the city, and that he has doubled down on trying to kill Thon. So later, back at the village, we see Green Lantern come and pick up Ollie and Lim, and while they're flying, Ollie sees a group of assassins trying to kill Thon. So Green Lantern jumps in to stop the assassins, and Ollie takes down the lookout. Green Lantern and Green Arrow then have an argument on how to handle the situation, with Ollie wanting to go off completely off of instinct and just take out Zoe. Meanwhile, Green Lantern wants to build up some evidence, prove what's going on one way or the other. So the two decide to sleep on it, and because the peace talks begin tomorrow, that's a fine situation. And they're going to begin the next day at noon. We then see Green Arrow suit up in an extra costume that he brought with him, while Green Lantern scans the crowds that have gathered to watch the talks for weapons, winning back some of Green Arrow's trust. Meanwhile, Green Arrow talks Zoe into giving up his pistol for the peace talks, as the crowd gathers to gathers to hear the speech, this speech begins, and Green Lantern puts up a shield in front of Thawne so that he doesn't get shot from the crowd, which works great until an arrow is shot at Zoe from behind him, and Thawne then jumps in front of it to save Zoe, and Green Arrow goes running after the would-be assassin, while Hal gets the crowd under control. Green Arrow goes to the roof and finds his buddy Lim running off with the bow and arrows. So Ollie grabs Lim and finds Green Lantern, and together they go back to check on Thawne, but they find him dead, which strikes Green Lantern as being a little funky since the last time he left Thawne, he was not only alive, but he was also conscious. So he investigates the body and he finds a bullet hole, and he sees that Zoe has fired his pistol recently. Well, first of all, he has it back, and it's been fired recently. So Green Lantern decides the best way to handle it is to completely embarrass him by stripping him down and tossing him into the crowd. And then Green Arrow says that he will take care of Lim and make sure he gets to justice. And then there's also this brief little aside where Green Lantern and Green Arrow meet again in their civilian identities in a sketchy apartment area where Oliver's decided to live now. And they basically just have a nice, hey, this is going to be a thing for a while in the run. This is going to be a big run later in comics history moment. Alright, so that's the story, and honestly, it's a pretty good one. It's mostly a Green Arrow story, looking at it. Green Arrow's the one who has a character arc throughout the story. He's the one who changes throughout the story. And Green Lantern's kind of just there. And that's very similar to most Denny O'Neil Green Lantern, Green Arrow stories. Green Arrow's the one who's doing things. Green Lantern's there too. And honestly, that is an interesting aspect of the story. I do really like that that as opposed to most Denny O'Neil Green Lantern, Green Arrow stories where Green Arrow's right the whole time and Green Lantern's wrong the whole time, I like that this one strikes the balance of both of them are wrong at the beginning of the story. And I like that that Green Arrow figures it out first, and he figures it out a lot harder, and then he has to explain it to Green Lantern. I do like that aspect of the story, and I do like the Green Arrow paralleling Iron Man in this story, where he gets blown up by his own landmine, and X, Y, and Z happens. That's an interesting aspect of the story. Over the Green Arrow just sort of letting the kid who kills the monk, letting him go at the end. Normally, that's not a decision that I would like for a story like this, but it's a very in-character thing for Green Arrow to do, and it's a very in-character for Green Lantern to let him. So it works on that aspect for me. Yeah, overall, I do like this story. I do think it's pretty good. It's not necessarily a must-read story, but it's definitely good. The art is very nice, actually. It looks like traditional 80s Marvel art to me, or 80s or early 90s DC art. And I mean that in a good way, because I do just like the art in this story. But honestly, I don't have a ton more to say on it. It's a very interesting story. It gets the political intrigue angle down. It gets the characters pretty good. It is just it's a well-made story, and I do appreciate it for that. But really, that's all I have time for today, so I'm just another guy named James, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.